You guys have had a good week. If you don't know me, my name is Zach. I'm one of the gentlemen on staff here at the church. Will is not here this Sunday. Him and Tiffany are actually teaching at a marriage conference, so you're stuck with me this morning. We're going to be starting our series this morning in Habakkuk. It's a 3-chapter book. We're in chapter 1 this morning, and so if you would with me, grab your Bibles. If you don't have a Bible, there are some Bibles on the back table there. Use your app, whatever you got in front of you. I want to make sure that the Word of God is in front of us as we learn this morning. So if you would with me, flip to chapter 1 in Habakkuk. As you get there, I want to just share a little bit of a sentiment with you that I had written down in my journal this past week. If I'm being honest with you, and Jenny kind of let the cat out of the bag, chapter 1 is a little bit of a downer. And we're not going to get out of it this morning. It's not going to be until next week and really even the week after that we're going to see a little bit of an uplift and a cheery mood. And so just giving you the pre-warning now. And I thought it was appropriate to share this journal entry with you that I had about a week ago because it to me describes a lot of what's going on in this chapter. I wrote that everywhere we look today, we see evidence of brokenness and turmoil. We're confronted daily by news of violence, injustice, and suffering. Communities being torn apart by conflict. Leaders who seem more interested in power than in serving the people. Systems that fail the most vulnerable among us. Many feel that justice is slow, if it ever comes at all. There's a deep-seated frustration, a sense of our cries for change going unheard, and that perhaps even God himself is distant or silent. We can feel lost in the chaos, longing for answers, longing for hope, for a sign that things can and will get better. And in face of so much pain, so much wrong left unaddressed, some of us find ourselves wondering if God is really in it. Is God really here? Is he seeing any of this? If he's watching, then why isn't he acting? Maybe this is how you have felt over the past couple days, the past couple weeks, this past season, years even. Maybe this is describing your heart posture. But may I, for a moment, just put this in front of us. When I wrote this last week, it wasn't actually to do with anything going on with today. It was everything going on with Habakkuk and his story. These very frustrations felt deeply thousands of years ago by a prophet named Habakkuk. The description I've just shared is a world that he knew, a world where he too saw injustice, where he questioned God's silence in the face of suffering. As we look at Habakkuk's story today, we're reminded that these questions and these doubts are nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. And more importantly, we're reminded that God is not distant or indifferent to our struggles, no matter how silent he may seem. And so the question that I have for us this morning that I want us together to wrestle with is this: why does evil sometimes seem to thrive? This is the penultimate question, right? If you've ever had a conversation with a neighbor, an atheist neighbor, or somebody who doesn't believe like you, this may be the very first thing that they ask you. Why does God allow evil? Why is there so much evil in the world if we have such a good God? Have you ever had that thought when you're looking outside into the world, looking at our culture, looking at the media, looking at the people at your job, in your neighborhood? Do you ever think to yourself, why does evil seem to continually thrive? Have we wondered that? About 600 years before the birth of Jesus, the prophet named Habakkuk was asking this very question. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Habakkuk. He was likely a temple musician, and his book was likely written somewhere about 600 BC. But we know almost next to nothing about him except that he was part of a Jewish community in and around Jerusalem when society was falling into chaos. And so this is the scene that we have. We begin first in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 1, where it says, the prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. Your translation may say prophecy. Other translations may read oracle. In the Hebrew, the word is masah. Masah literally means an utterance, a doom, okay? An utterance, a doom, a burden. God is giving Habakkuk a burdensome message. I want us to hold on to that word this morning as we talk about prophecy. Picture someone with a backpack full of rocks just weighing them down every step as they go through life. Everywhere he goes, it's like it's weighing on him. That's part of what's happening here. Now, the minor prophets, of whom Habakkuk is, are probably the portion of Scripture we tend to look at the least because, spoiler alert, they're a little not fun to read. They're pretty difficult. The prophets were people that God brought out in times of history when all other systems were in a state of collapse. So, a prophet, for our purposes, is not just somebody who can tell the future, although that certainly can be the case. That's often how we speak of the prophetic. But a prophet is also someone who speaks on behalf of God. Okay, somebody who speaks on behalf of God. Prophets remind us of the truth when we are falling short. I think we tend to avoid prophets. I know I certainly do. But we desperately need them. Now, in this particular book, it's only 3 chapters long, and Habakkuk is ministering to his people in a time when they were about to feel overwhelming military power from a group of people called the Babylonians. Babylonians were moving westward and were about to go over the borders of Israel, take over Jerusalem, burn it to the ground, destroy the temple until nothing was left. They would take every able-bodied man and woman, move them hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their hometowns, their family roots, and present them as slaves. That's what's about to happen. We call this period in biblical history the exile. It lasted roughly 70 years. And Habakkuk is looking right down the barrel of this impending doom, sensing where everything is going. And so he's one of those people asking this question that perhaps you and I have asked before: why is all of this happening? Why in the world? I'm looking around at my life, around the culture, around the world here, and all these people I care about are suffering or about to suffer. God, why is this happening? And I want us to see that this tortured man of God is actually a gift to us this morning. Not so much for his answers, but for his questions. Not so much for his sermons, but for his prayers. So in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 1, we are introduced to Habakkuk as a prophet of God. Here's what I love. Habakkuk is going to remind us that even when God seems silent, we can question. Even when God seems silent, we can question. The name Habakkuk literally means to wrestle. To wrestle. It means to embrace, to wrestle with God. Most of the prophets are books or sermons that are preached to rebellious people, but this book is a back and forth wrestling with God. It's unique in that way. He is maybe perhaps the only prophet to really push back on God like this. It is very appropriate that his name means to wrestle, to embrace. So in verse 2, he lays out his argument. He says, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you in violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds." Anyone this morning feel that way or ever felt that way? Lord, there is so much injustice in this world. Lord, why do you allow this type of thing to continue, the division to grow? Why do we have to deal with this medical diagnosis? Why won't you allow my spouse and I to have a child like we so desperately want to? God, it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair. God, it seems like you could do something, but you don't. Why? He goes on in verse 4. "Therefore, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted." Translation, nothing seems fair. Has anyone ever been there before? I want you to see something briefly here with me. He mentions the law. What is really clear is that there's a lot of evil out there, but Habakkuk's first area of interest is the people of God. It's so easy to point fingers out there into the world, all the things that are happening, but Habakkuk's first burden is, God, your people are falling apart at the seams. Your law is falling apart, it seems. The problem isn't just out there in the world. Sometimes the problem is right in here. So why is this happening? Essentially, I think he has three major problems with God right now. See if you can relate to any of these. Number one, he's saying, God, you don't seem to care. Number two, he says, you aren't doing much when you definitely could. And number three, what you are doing, God, does not seem fair. Habakkuk essentially is thinking what I believe maybe a lot of us have thought. God, if I were in your shoes, I would do things different, right? Like we felt that way before, right? God, this thing that you're doing in my life, in this person's life, if I were you, I just wouldn't do it that way. Maybe we don't actually have the confidence to pray like this, but man, God, if I was in charge, I would do things a little bit different. This is essentially the basis of the movie Bruce Almighty, if you've ever seen that movie. Like, God, I could do a better job if I had your job, right? Like, I don't think I would go about it this way. I've got a better plan. And maybe you're wondering, is it okay to bring this kind of frustration to God? And this morning, what I want to say to us is not only is it okay, it's invited. Friends, the Psalm book that Jesus knew in saying something like a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. There's Psalms of crying out to God, God, where are you? Why are you doing it this way? Like, what is this? Did you lose track of me? Did you lose sight? We have a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. All throughout Scripture, we have this guy named Jeremiah who says things like, I wish I was never born. I just don't even want to have been born. It's not only okay to bring this kind of frustration to God, I would argue it's invited. And it's when we do, when we're honest about what's really going on, that there's a depth that happens within our souls. This is where we know God the deepest, where we feel His love and His mercy and His grace the greatest. Grace meets us where we're at, not where we pretend to be. We don't have to have our act cleaned up to approach God. If my 6-month-old son had to clean himself up before I would love him, it would never happen, right? He's gross. He's got poop all over him. He's got the throw up going on. I love him anyway, right? This is us with God. We don't have to clean ourselves up first. We get to bring all of that. Our invitation this morning is to come to God with all of the mess. So what do you do when you see with your eyes something that doesn't match the conviction of your soul? Habakkuk has a reminder for us this morning that even when doubt creeps in, faith holds on. Even when doubt creeps in, faith holds on. This is where Habakkuk is at. He's like, I have a conviction in my heart, but right now, it's not matching what I'm seeing out there, God. It's not matching what I see going on around me. Years ago, I saw a pastor give this example, and it was from a Seth Godin's book, The Dip. It kind of stuck with me because it's pretty cheesy, but I think it's pretty helpful. If we'll have the graph on here, we can see we got this graph. Just ignore the results and the effort. The book is about something completely different, but it's good for us this morning. We've got a couple different points on the graph up here. And this is kind of the main thesis of the book. And the way that the pastor used it was completely different than how Seth Godin used it, if you're familiar with the book. He says essentially, all of us before Jesus start right there on that first dot on the far, far left. Okay, this is where we all are before we knew or know Jesus. This is the person who is far from God, with no heart surrendered, who has not trusted Jesus as Lord and as Savior. And for some of you in the room this morning, this may be your experience. Maybe you went to a conference, or you heard a sermon, or you had some kind of supernatural experience or encounter, and all of a sudden your faith just skyrockets, right? It goes to that second point. Man, I'm on a high. I'm on this high ground. Man, mountaintop experience. I have just been lit on fire for the Lord. I've accepted Jesus, and I'm so excited about it. Like in this season, right, it's every Sunday. Every song the worship team plays is speaking right to me. I love it. I love every one of the songs. Man, every sermon that Will preaches is speaking right to my heart, right in this moment, right? Not just Sunday mornings, but maybe as I come into Sunday morning, I see that there's a parking spot that God has given just for me. It's right at the front of the building. Perfect. Everything is awesome. A lot of us have been there before. A lot of us have maybe gone from that moment to the next one, to the dip, where we've experienced some type of heartache, where we've experienced some type of crisis of belief, as Henry Blackaby would call it. A season where we're like, what happened to all of this awesome mountaintop experience? God, why is this happening in my life? Why did I get the cancer diagnosis? Why did we lose our child before they were born? God, why did you take my spouse from me so early? This experience that I'm feeling, this tension in my life doesn't match what it was before. And I think when we're in this moment, when we're in this season of a crisis of belief, we have a tendency to go two directions, okay? One, we try desperately to go back to that mountaintop experience. We try desperately to get those feelings back, to get those emotions. God, just take me back to the summer camp when I was 16 and I loved you so much and I had all of those awesome feelings and my faith was just electric, right? Or the other option, the tendency, is that we just walk away entirely. That's what a lot of people tend to do when we face some sort of difficulty, a tragedy, heartache, pain, grief. We either try to go back to the way things were, and try to conjure up that type of emotion, or we just walk away altogether. We either deny reality, get mad at God, and say, forget you. But what should we do? Is there another path? When what we see doesn't match what we believe. We could go with option one. We could try to go back in time. We can go with option two. We say, no thanks, God, I'm out of here. Or I would argue what we need to choose is the more difficult route, where we lean into, embrace, and wrestle with God. Okay, this is option number 3 that we must choose. We must choose to lean into relationship with Jesus, to choose to wrestle with those hard questions and ask God, what's going on here? I guarantee at some point, this could be decades down the road, there is a depth of intimacy that you will have with the Lord when you let your heart wrestle with Him. It only happens in your heart in the wilderness. It can only happen through times of crisis. The reality is that even when we don't see the plan, God has a purpose. Even when we don't see the plan, God has a purpose. I had a mentor many years ago, a pastor friend of mine, that he used to say that in the deserts is where roots go down the deepest. I can tell you personally, I have had desert seasons in my life that I do not want to relive. Like real desert seasons recently where I look back over my shoulder, I'm like, God, I do not want to go back there. No thanks, right? Like I don't want to experience that again. And yet, I can look back at those times and say, I think the Lord did some of His most profound work in my heart and in my soul in those seasons. That's where when I walked with the Lord in those seasons, that's where my faith grew the most. That's when my dependency on God grew the fastest. I guarantee any spiritual juggernaut, any person of the faith that you admire in your life that has been a source of life and light to you, I guarantee they've gone through some version of this. That you might be meeting them up there at the top, at the precipice of their faith, but they only got there by going through some of the darkest seasons of their faith with God. This is what St. John of the Cross calls a dark night of the soul. I remember years ago learning that Mother Teresa, which I think we can probably all agree Mother Teresa is like the poster child for all things holiness, right? And in these journals that they found after Mother Teresa had passed away, they found some astonishing things. They found a deep anguish in the pages of some of these journals. Mother Teresa wrote things like, I'm not sure I even believe in God right now. I'm not sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I remember reading and thinking that if Mother Teresa feels that way sometimes, maybe it's okay that I do too. But she embraced it. She wrestled with God. The New Testament writer James, the half-brother of Jesus, would say it this way: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may become mature and complete, not lacking in anything." The dip for us feels like chapter 1. And in these verses, I hear Habakkuk angry at God. Habakkuk is burning because he looks into this world around him. He sees the horror of what evil is doing. And he essentially says, God, why does it seem like evil is winning right now? To call Habakkuk's words a simple prayer, I would argue, seems inadequate. This isn't just a prayer, it's a protest. God, what the heck? What is this? God, if I can't tolerate what's going on around us, how can you tolerate it? Like, this is not a folded hands, bowed on a church, nice Sunday school prayer. This is a prayer with a pounded chest, bloodshot eyes, voice breaking. God, what is this? I don't understand. I don't get what you're doing. Where are you? How long will you let this go on? Because waiting seems to only make things worse. But we have to remember when we're in chapter 1 is that even when we're frustrated, honest prayers matter. Even when we're frustrated, honest prayers matter. How long, oh God, I imagine is a prayer that God hears quite often. God invites us to pray this way, to pray with the psalmist, to pray with Jeremiah, to pray with the book of Lamentations. God, where are you? Because grace meets us where we are, not where we pretend to be. And I'll be honest, Habakkuk's prayer makes me feel uncomfortable. Not because of how aggressive it is, but because of how rarely mine are. The aggressiveness of his prayers is what makes me uncomfortable. It's the realization that I very rarely pray with that level of confidence. Because that's the temptation, right? To clean it up, to make my prayer just a little bit more churchy, a little bit more acceptable to bring to God, forgetting that he's in the midst of the mess along with us all of the way. Friends, some of us need to repent this morning for always being angry. That one, I think, is obvious at little things, trivial things, but other of us, we need to repent of never getting angry at the stuff that really matters, at injustice, at the exploitation of the marginalized, at sin running rampant in this world. The people of Israel were turning from God and practicing evil, and Habakkuk was proclaiming the truth of God, but it seemed to only make things worse. And so God answers Habakkuk. I think his answer is going to be a little surprising, and it was to Habakkuk. He answers him in verse 5 saying, "Look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told." Now, the word amaze here is the word tamah. Tamah means to be astonished or to marvel. God is saying, what I am doing in your midst will be a jaw-dropping moment, and you wouldn't even believe it if I told you. He'll be amazed, astonished. And I imagine maybe Habakkuk's already a little bit amazed that he's even getting a response, right? He goes on in verse 6 and says, "I am raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping to devour. They all come intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all the fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, they capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on, guilty people whose own strength is their God." That's the plan. That's good, right? We're happy with that. No, of course not. That's the plan, and it's supposed to astonish us. I imagine Habakkuk being confused at this point in the conversation. Essentially, what God is saying is, look, you guys are bad, and they are way worse, right? Way worse. Habakkuk, you think the people of God are messed up? Then let me tell you what. I got a plan for that. I know you hate them, but I'm going to use them. Have you ever been told a corrective word by somebody you don't like, but they were right? Right? You ever had that horrible moment? All of us hate it, right? You're like, I don't like you as a person, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense. You would never admit it to their face, obviously, but this is that times infinity, right? It's God saying, listen, I know you hate them, but I'm actually going to use them. I'm going to use them to bring about my work in the world. Put yourself there. How do you respond to God? What do you do when you're in chapter 1? When you're living in the tension of like belief and doubt. It's the story of the man in Mark chapter 9. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. They both feel true. I do believe, but I'm having a hard time right now. I'm having a hard time holding on to this, God. I would argue that a committed believer will often experience both faith and doubt at the same time. Lord, I trust you, but also, what is this? Tim Keller, I think, puts it brilliantly. He says, a faith without some doubt is like a human body without any antibodies in it. People who blithely go through life too busy or indifferent to ask hard questions about why they believe as they do will find themselves defenseless against either the experience of tragedy or the probing question mark of a smart skeptic. A person's faith can collapse almost overnight if she has failed over the years to listen patiently to her own doubts, which, catch this, should only be discarded after long reflection. Believers should acknowledge, and there's the word, wrestle with doubts. Not only their own, but their friends and neighbors. It is no longer sufficient to hold beliefs just because you inherited them. They're like antibodies, right? If you've gone through a season of doubt, that dip, that valley, it's like your faith has gone through an illness. Your body, your faith has produced antibodies to fight off the illness. You're like, my faith is actually stronger because of the heartache. It's stronger because of the season that I went through with God or that I am going through now. To put it more succinctly, Frederick Buechner, I love this, he said, doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. Doubts do something. They shake you. It keeps you awake. I love what he actually says right before that phrase. He says, whether your faith is that there is a God or that there is not a God, if you don't have any doubts, you're either kidding yourself or you're asleep. This is a safe place to bring your doubts. Church, the community that we have around us, is a safe place to bring your frustration, even your anger at God. Because God shows us again and again and again, He would rather us argue with Him than walk away from Him. We see throughout the pages of Scripture that He can handle it. He can handle our frustration. So God reveals His plan. He's going to use the Babylonians, a nation more wicked and more violent than Israel, to punish Israel's disobedience. For Habakkuk, I imagine this must have been even more difficult to understand than Israel's evil going unnoticed in the first place. From the perspective of an American like us, this would be the equivalent of God using a terrorist group to bring about the correction of the American church. Can you imagine the response we would have? I'm raising up a group of people far more wicked than you are to bring about my plan with you. How would you feel? Wouldn't some of us feel like, I'm sorry, did something get crossed there? Did I miss the message there? That doesn't make sense, God. Most of us would be shocked and say, God, you don't know what you're doing in this moment. This cannot be your plan. And this is precisely Habakkuk's response. God, how could you possibly use a people more wicked than Israel to bring about your judgment? I do not like this answer. Anyone ever had that conversation with God? God, I got the answer. Hard pass. Option B, please. Like, no thanks. I'm good. So watch as Habakkuk lives in this tension of both faith and doubt. Let's look at verse 12. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my only one, you will never die. Statement of faith right there, by the way. He's wrestling with God right now. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. To see all the names of God in just this one short verse. Lord, my God, my Holy One, my rock. It's as if Habakkuk is saying, God, you have some names to live up to here. Right? Like, what are you doing? The implication is, Lord, you have married Israel, so how can you use the Babylonians to destroy us? My God, Habakkuk is saying, I don't have any other gods to trust. I have nobody else to trust in. You're it. My Holy One says, you can't possibly do wrong. You're not like the other lowercase g gods. You have to do what is right. My rock is Habakkuk saying, we depend on you to be strong and unchanging. If you can't bear the weight of your people, we have no hope. And he goes on in verse 13, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those most righteous than themselves? What Habakkuk is saying, maybe we have felt this way before, how could you possibly watch, let alone allow something like this to happen? How could you allow this people who have no sense of right and wrong, far more wicked than we are, how could you tolerate that, God? How could you even let them survive, let alone let them be instruments of carrying out your plan? It doesn't make sense. And Habakkuk paints this picture in verse 14 for us. He says, you've made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hook, catches them in his net. He gathers them up in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. For by his net he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? What Habakkuk is essentially saying here is, what is this? Survival of the fittest? Is that what we're doing here, God? Like, are we just bait in this long, bizarre plan of yours? The Babylonians aren't even going to thank you, by the way, God. They're going to worship in their own strength. What's the upside for you here? Like what's going on? And again, he's trying to reconcile what he sees with what he believes. Sure enough, the Babylonians came. They crushed Judah and Jerusalem. The city was sacked in 586 BC, somewhere roughly 15 to 30 years after Habakkuk's prayer. Jerusalem and the whole temple was destroyed. But with God, things aren't always as they seem. We remember the Bible's very first prophecy in Genesis, where God tells the serpent about a coming son of a woman, saying, he will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Remember Isaiah's prophecy of a coming Messiah. He was despised and rejected by man, a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. By his wounds we are healed. I wonder if Jesus, as he hung on the cross, if it didn't sound a little bit like Habakkuk, my God, why have you forsaken me? What looked like a great defeat was the greatest victory that the world has ever known. But the story's not finished. Some of us right now, we're in chapter 1 right now. We're in a season of wondering, what is this, God? Why have you put this in front of me? Maybe you're in chapter 2. Chapter 2 is all about waiting. Maybe you're in chapter 3 where we eventually get to worship, but we're not there yet. We're not yet there yet in this story. As chapter 1 closes, the important thing to realize is that Habakkuk stays in dialogue with God. Habakkuk, true to his namesake, says, I don't understand, but I'm not letting go. And this is my encouragement for us today. Some of us are asking, God, why would you allow this? I wish at times that I had a neater, nicer answer for us in this moment, but I don't. Why would God allow this? I don't know. But I know that it can't be because he doesn't love us. Because look at the cross. There are so many things on this side of heaven that I just honestly, I don't know why it happens, but I know that he loves us. Look at the life, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. There's the proof. The Bible again shows us over and over and over again, God would rather us argue with him than we walk away from him. God can handle our questions. He can handle our doubt. He can handle the anger and the frustration that comes in seasons like chapter 1. May we, like Habakkuk, wrestle. May we also remember his ways are much higher than ours. I think of the prophet Jeremiah says, this word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, go down to the potter's house, and there I'll give you my message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hand. So the potter formed it in another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me, and he said, can I not do with you, Israel, as the potter does, declares the Lord? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so you are in my hand, Israel. May we never forget that God is able. He who began a good work in us is faithful to complete it. Even when we don't understand, we choose to wrestle. Even as we bring our questions and our doubt, it's equally as important that we bring our honest prayers and say, all right, Lord, I don't get it, I don't see it, but I'm trusting anyway. We pray that with the psalmist that says in Psalm 139, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way of everlasting. Search me and know my heart. That's being with Jesus. That's intimacy with Jesus. That's abiding in the vine. Just test me, know my anxious thoughts. See that there's no offensive way in me. That's becoming like Jesus, saying that, God, would you chisel away in me any part of me that's not of you? Which, by the way, chiseling is pretty painful, pretty uncomfortable. It's painful at times. It's saying, all right, Lord, I don't want to just simply be with you. Would you look at what's really going on in my heart, and whatever's not of you, get rid of it, God. Don't just leave me there. Lead me in the way of everlasting. May we live as differently as a result. Habakkuk doesn't walk away from God. He's tormented, he's confused, he's desperate, but he waits to hear from God. Again, I wish I had a nice heartfelt story to wrap this all up today in a nice bow, but I don't. Because this is what life is like in chapter 1. This is what life is like sometimes, right? It's not a sitcom where all the difficulties get wrapped up in a nice little bow and then we're on to the next episode. Sometimes we have to sit in chapter 1. We have to hold on. We have to wrestle with God. We have to pray, Lord, would you work in me in this valley, in this season, and do something that only you can do? What if we became as a people a place that didn't just simply do that individually, but we reminded each other to stay clinging to God in the midst of heartache, in the midst of sorrow, in the midst of pain, in the midst of confusion and doubt? God meets us there. May we, like Habakkuk, always continue to wrestle with God.